Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Ukraine, Russia, China show on Pod TV. My name is Sasha Star, and today's guests are Dr. Jonathan Lockwood. Welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sasha. Glad to be here as always.
Yes, my pleasure. And Ivan Kucherenko from Kyiv, Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Ivan.
Hello, Sasha. Hello, Jonathan. Glad
Great
to be
to see
here
you.
today.
And you have a clip for us to show?
Yeah, I have even two, and we can
Even two,
start. But
let's
they're really short. So we can start
okay,
with the first one, and then
sure.
the second. So let's start with the first.
Wow, it's so painful to see what's really happening, and that emphasize the importance of having nuclear arms available, because that makes you insulate from any critics, punishment, and you can essentially insist on your will to, with such a mediocre army and the horrible economy which is falling apart, you can still command, and even countries like United States, they're helpless to do anything against it. Donald Trump is involved in geschäft diplomacy still. I don't know
I
how
don't.
much time it will take for him to understand that Putin is playing him as a little puppy. So, Jonathan, when it's going to finish?
Right now, I believe that the Trump administration is slowly coming to realize that the Russian regime, led by Putin, has a totally alien mindset. That is a mindset with which they are totally unfamiliar. They have never encountered a mindset like the regime of President Putin, and so therefore they are not sure how exactly to deal with it. President Trump has instinctively believed that everyone wants to make a deal, economically. That is the basis of the way he has dealt with foreign powers, and that is the way he believes he can solve it now. However, he is being compelled to recognize that here is a mindset which does not recognize the idea of the art of the deal, that does not recognize economic benefit, because Vladimir Putin can command whatever resources he wants to have. He doesn't think in terms of money. He thinks in terms of power. Power is his currency, not money or not economic prosperity even. So this is a very interesting problem for the Trump administration, and it is one that they are almost being compelled by circumstances and by competing foreign policy priorities to recognize. For example, President Trump had no problem at all using military power against Iran or supporting its use against Iran.
Iran doesn't have nuclear
Right. They don't have
weapons.
they don't have they were trying to get them, and therefore Trump he said he must not have a nuclear weapon because he recognizes that if once a nation has nuclear weapons, by the way, this was the motivation behind back in 1994 when I was studying the perceptions of the various republics of the controlling the what was then a divided Soviet nuclear arsenal. The Ukrainians, in particular, there was a large body of opinion that wanted to retain the nuclear arsenal of the Soviet that they had under their control, at least administrative control, because they believed that it would be an excellent deterrent against invasion. They were right. But unfortunately, the Western powers combined to compel Ukraine with offering so-called security guarantees, which never materialized, compelled Ukraine to give up its portion of the Soviet nuclear arsenal. That was an error, which even President Bill Clinton, admitted later on. He says that was a big mistake on his part.
And that was a big mistake on the part of Ukraine to agree to this.
Right. They should never have.
They should have gone even farther because both Belarus and Kazakhstan, the other two countries that had nuclear weapons,
Yeah, they had it.
wanted to get rid of them because it's too costly to maintain and they didn't have enough.
They were also.
So Ukraine should have acquired from Belarus and Kazakhstan nuclear weapons and keep their own, and then Ukraine would never, ever be in a situation where it is
Right.
today.
No, I agree with you on that. What Belarus and Kazakhstan wanted at the time, Belarus was just looking for economic benefits
Absolutely.
to trade their portion of the nuclear arsenal for economic investment. They were looking purely in terms of money, which made some sense from their point of view, because the Belarusians never really had a very strong sense of their own nationality, unlike Ukraine, which had a much stronger sense of national identity. Kazakhstan was somewhere in the middle. Nazarbayev, he was looking for using the nuclear weapons arsenal that he had as a bargaining chip to get more economic investment in the
Similar
West.
to Belarus.
Right, similar to Belarus, a little bit firmer and more unwilling to give up its nuclear weapons that cheaply, but the biggest hardliners of all were of course the Ukrainians, who many saw that as their guarantee of sovereignty and independence and a deterrent against invasion by Russia. So we have that. Now we are learning the hard lesson many years later, that of the value of nuclear weapons, both as a deterrent, and the Russians see it as a guarantee, as a symbol of their great power status, and as they call it, Ядерная устрашение сил, nuclear intimidation forces. This gives you a very good idea because they have been using them precisely as intimidation forces, brandishing their nuclear arsenal and intimidating the Western powers with the fear of escalation, relying on the Western fear of escalation to allow the Russians to accomplish their political objectives through military conquests. Unfortunately, their military instrument has proved to be considerably less than up to the task, as the Ukrainians have been surprising them time and again. And right now, the Russians are on the verge of their offensive efforts collapsing, because they have been driven back in their latest attempts at a summer offensive, and it is not working out. So I still contend that the Ukrainians have this opportunity in front of them, and if I were a gambling man, I would be betting on the Ukrainians unleashing their own counteroffensive that will surprise the Russians, and they will focus on the area of the Crimea, and that they may use a diversionary counteroffensive in the east to draw off the Russians' attention. But what they will mainly do is they will launch a surprise counteroffensive in the Crimea, first taking out the Kerch Bridge, render it useless. That cuts off Russian reinforcement and resupply from the Crimea. Their occupying forces will be isolated, and then the Ukrainians can launch their counteroffensive into Crimea with a strategic reserve, which I am almost metaphysically certain that they have in their possession.
I would be careful about Kerch Bridge for the reasons that one Russian will fall apart, then Krasnodar region could become a Ukrainian territory, and there could be a very good trade between Krasnodar region and the rest of Ukraine. And also, don't forget that in Krasnodar region there are a lot of ethnic Ukrainians, and they even speak some kind of a variety of language which is halfway Russian and Ukrainian. Ivan, am I missing something there?
I hope so. We're all here counting days until this illegal bridge would be destroyed. There were already 3 attempts to destroy it, and I hope that the next attempt would be the last and the most resultive one. It's really a tough task because Kerch Bridge, Crimean Bridge, is the most secured object in Russia. Actually, I'm not sure whether the Kremlin is guarded more than the Kerch Bridge, because it's really a symbol of Russian annexation of Crimea.
Exactly.
And yeah, they're really care about it, and they put all possible they can't provide their military production facilities with air defense, but they bring all air defense to the Kerch Bridge. But sooner or later it will be destroyed. Ukrainian security service is really genius in covert operations, like we've seen from the Spiderweb operation, and the first attempt of destroying Crimean Bridge after which it was significantly damaged was brilliant as well. We probably forgot it, but they've also used a very unusual tactic to destroy it. There were no saboteurs which put some TNT explosives or something else. It was just a truck delivering a regular cargo, which seemed to Russian security
Say
services
ice cream,
like
for example.
well, not ice cream. It was some kind of packaging materials. So they were delivering packaging materials, but those packaging materials, they were in them were integrated explosives. Those packaging materials, they were explosives themselves, and in the very specific time when there were a train, cargo train, which transferred the oil supplies, the gas, and some military ammunition. When that truck passed over the bridge near that train, it exploded. Also, the place was chosen because before that, Ukrainian security services, they've achieved the blueprints of the Kerch Bridge, which were actually a top secret material. They were guarded pretty well, but Ukrainian security services managed to achieve those blueprints, so they knew where are the weak points of that Kerch Bridge. So there were several points to come in one place in order for that explosion to be successful, and that truck exploded in the bridge weak point when the cargo train transferring those gas and other flammable equipment passed nearby. So it actually amplified the level of explosion. It was really amazing operation. I don't know what they will invent the next time, but I hope this is a brilliant operation as well.
I think that this Kerch Bridge is one of the reasons why Trump is admiring Putin because as a developer, he could learn a thing or two how to create these structures which is impossible to destroy. And actually, I've seen one just a couple of weeks ago during my trip in Warsaw. There is one. The Stalin's inspired skyscrapers, in Stalin's style, and you have
Yeah.
7 sisters in Moscow. So one they sort of presented as a gift to Warsaw. So once Warsaw got free from Soviet bullshit, and the first thing what they started to do is to figure out how to get rid of this present of Stalin. So they spent years, and scientists and everybody was involved in it, and they came to the conclusion that without nuclear device, it is impossible to destroy. Full stop, period. That's how Russians build their bridges and skyscrapers and so on. So last time, a couple of weeks ago, when I was in Warsaw, I discovered absolutely amazing thing what's happened there. Because before you could see the skyscraper from every place in Warsaw, regardless where you are. The first thing what you see is a Stalin's skyscraper. So what they did, they surrounded the skyscrapers with all kind of new developments like modern hotels, office buildings, very tall. So they're now hiding this presence of Stalin. You cannot see it unless you walk right to the skyscrapers and you see it this way. Otherwise, you cannot see it anymore. So this was
very clever camouflage.
Yeah, very clever decision, and it worked actually.
Everything can be destroyed. It's a matter of time and
The material.
the other factors. But I think everything can be destroyed, and
It's
not
just whether
with,
it's worth the time and the effort to do it.
yeah.
What do you gain?
What kind of efforts, and also the achievements of Russia, they are not a constant. What they've created, what they've seized from Ukraine, from other countries, it will be destroyed, or countries will get it back, like Warsaw, like Poland, which got their independence after the end of the Soviet Union. Actually, yesterday there was an anniversary, third anniversary of liberation of the Snake Island. You probably know its story, and it was it's an island close to the coast of Ukraine, which Russia actually captured in the first day of their invasion, and it's a strategic point was for Russia to control the Ukrainian coast and the waters of the Black Sea, but Ukraine managed to kick Russia off it. Before that, the Moskva cruiser went in the well-known direction, and I've got a really nice video. It's a second video for today's short, so we can just recall for ourselves how it was.
To fuck itself. The legend says ancient Greek hero Achilles was buried on Snake Island in Ukraine. In modern history, however, the only thing buried there was Russian hope for Ukrainian surrender. Here's what happened. On the very first day of the full-scale invasion, a Russian warship ordered the Ukrainian border guards to surrender. Their response became legendary, but forces were unequal. The island was seized, Ukrainians taken captive. Guards' response went immediately viral and became a symbol of Ukrainian defiance in the face of a bigger, brutal enemy. Russians were outraged. They spent months trying to figure out who said it. Ukrainians refused to talk during interrogations. To this day, the real author is protected. Even the spotlight on another soldier serves as a cover. However, that same warship, the cruiser Moskva, did indeed go fuck itself. Ukraine sank it in the spring of 2022. Eventually, Snake Island was liberated. The national flag was raised again, and all the cats were safely evacuated. The phrase entered history. Since then, it's been repeated by millions, becoming the war's most iconic meme and slogan.
Wow, what a humiliation!
Uh,
Oh,
that's just
that's,
that's
that's
just that's just that's just priceless.
it is. Yes, yes, it is. Ivan, one thing, what worries me is that Russians supposedly be now in their summer attacking session, and they should attack all fronts and all directions and so on. And it's not really happening, although the skirmishes are continuing, and there is a great number of them. And one, I forgot who in Ukrainian blogosphere, one author, he voiced an opinion that Russians are not taking villages, cities, or whatever by on purpose. What they want to do, they want to exhaust Ukrainian army. They want to kill as many Ukrainians as possible. That's why they continue this attacks on Ukrainian cities and civilian targets and so on. Ivan, do you think that this is something what we should worry about?
Um, um, Really nice question. Actually, the Russian summer campaign seems not getting the results they've planned. And the number of attacks is decreasing. When they started that campaign, there were more than 200 Russian attacks on a day regularly. Now the number is like 140, 150. Also, the Russians, well, one of their plans was to seize the city of Sumy. And to attack and to capture the part of Sumy region. They were thrown off the Sumy, and their invasion in the Sumy region actually failed. And moreover, Ukraine still controls some points in the Kursk region, which is on the border with the Sumy region. So Russians were not successful in kicking off Ukrainian forces from the Kursk region, and not successful in capturing Sumy region and the city of Sumy. Of course, they are terrorizing it, and they are terrorizing the Ukrainian cities constantly. And what Ukrainian experts admit is that now the Russian attacks are more focused on civilian objects and on terrorizing civilian population. That's what you're saying. In order to decrease the morale of Ukrainian people, in order to make Ukrainian people go and ask authorities to stop the war, to sign some kind of agreement with Russia, to agree on their requirements of actual capitulation of Ukraine, whatever. They're also enforcing their psychological operation on the internet. They're spreading propaganda. They're spreading and seeding fake videos. They say that, oh, people see these are some demonstrations in Kiev on the Maidan, and those people are actually requiring from the authorities to solve the war and sign a treaty with Russia. Whether this is a video of a meeting with the Ukrainian soldiers on Maidan, they just they fake the videos. They say that it's the video of demonstration of people demanding for the authorities to sign a peace treaty with Russia, whether it's with a video of another event, actually. This is all understandable and clear when they cannot achieve, when Russia cannot achieve their goals on the battlefield. They go to their common use tactics to terror Ukrainian civilians, to launch psychological operations in the media, in the social media, especially in the TikTok. All that stuff. As for the morale of the Ukrainian soldiers, I'm not sure that the terrorizing the civilian population decreases their morale to defend Ukrainian land. I think it's vice versa. Their morale is increasing when they see that the exit, the other way is just let Russia ruin Ukrainian cities. And I'm not sure what that was the expert you're listening for, because in
it could be Arestovich.
probably because in always the power is on that side which each defending, not on the side which is attacking. And Russians are attacking; they are losing significantly more soldiers than Ukrainian, which are defending. I've got a friend which is actually a drone operator on a Donetsk direction, and he said that just within a month, 1 month on his area of which he's responsible, it's a short front line. Russians lost 300 soldiers.
Wow.
Just they were destroyed by Ukrainian drones. Whether Ukrainian defenders lost 10 soldiers.
Nice
for a month.
Nice.
300 of confirmed the Russians dead on that on that one direction. So of course Russia has much more resource.
But they're not infinite.
It's not infinite, actually.
And actually, Ivan, the Russians are experiencing in two ways. They're experiencing a similar thing. They're resorting to terror attacks against Ukrainian cities is also very reminiscent of what Nazi Germany did against Great Britain once it was clear that the Luftwaffe could not gain air superiority over England. Instead, they resorted to terror attacks, night bombing attacks against London and other places. And of course, the Germans would continue this policy into 1944 with the use of their V-1 buzz bombs, the first drones, shall we say, almost the first drones, and the V-2 rockets. And the purpose of those was not to achieve any kind of meaningful military victory, but they were vengeance weapons. That's what they were called. And so they experienced that. And on their current offensives, they are experiencing the reverse of the Soviet experience during World War II. As they were mounting offensives against the Germans in the East, they were inflicting increasing casualties on the Germans. They were forcing them back, thanks also in part to the United States supplying Russia with Ford trucks. So they had a respectable logistics capability for once. But the Russians don't have that now. They have very poor logistical capability, which also is reflected in the fact that the force of their current offensives is steadily decreasing, and along with their casualties increasing. So they are quite clearly exhausting themselves. They're like a boxer who is a slugger who has been throwing his punches at his opponent and has run out of power. And eventually they are going to become vulnerable to Ukrainian counterattack.
A few words about China. China is not helping out to Iran, although they have a new line, the Iran to China, that they have now railway where they can transport both ways, different cargoes. But they have so much very profitable trade with US and European Union that all this Iranian stuff and even Russian, it's kind of a minuscule, and China cannot afford to risk It's enormously profitable trade with the rest of the world for either Iran or Russia or both altogether. Now,
So
Russia,
that may result in the fracturing of the so-called axis of evil.
that's exactly what's happening right now. Now, with Russian propaganda, they are now going into schools and they're indoctrinating the young Russian boys and girls, primarily boys. And I will not be surprised that once they will go through their supply of North Korean warriors and their own, they will create a Putler Jugend. And that's what you're going to see in Ukraine. 9, 10 years old, 12 years old, little boys fighting for the motherland. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it's not going to happen.
Keep in mind, Sasha, the Hitler Jugend, the werewolves, what they were worried about at the end of World War II, those Hitler youth were in defense against the Allies invading Germany.
Exactly.
It is very unlike. I would see it as practically impossible for the Russians to use young children in offensive operations against Ukraine. No, I don't see it. It would just be absolute suicide, and it would also be sacrificing their future population growth.
But you know what? They can make a propaganda, take pictures how these young boys are being killed and show, look at what Ukrainians are doing. They are killing our children. Come on, let's defend them. They will try to do something like this.
But not in this period of war, but maybe in future, and maybe not against Ukraine, because they're just growing the soldiers, the future generation of soldiers from the really early ages. It's what about? So it's really old tactics. Probably you've heard from the history, like the Ottoman Empire. They've stolen Ukrainian children actually, and grown them as enemies of the Kievan Rus. They were called Yanichars, and
they view mostly Yanichars.
Yeah. In the times of Ottoman Empire.
I have a question to you. Speaking about Poland, a little bit more about Poland. So there is a Russian myth that NATO moved in the 90s, they moved toward the east, and they grabbed Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary, and later on Baltic republics, or so on. So it was unlawful expansion of NATO to the east. Now I've read very interesting material, I think it was in Foreign Affairs, about Poland, how Poland joined NATO and why. Poland wanted to join NATO. I remember I was traveling to Poland in the 93, 94, and that was their aspiration to join European Union and the NATO. But NATO refused even to consider their application. So Poland said, yes, in this case, we are developing our own nuclear weapons, period, full stop. And they stopped asking for membership. And NATO came to Poland and offered them to join NATO because it was undesirable for various reasons for Poland to have their own nuclear weapons, especially if it's not a member of NATO. It was a horrifying thought. So what about Ukraine? What if Ukraine, which already had nuclear weapons in the past, they will say, well, okay, we are looking into two possibilities. One is to join NATO, and another one develop our own nuclear devices, which we already had many years ago, so we have to renew it in the next few months. We will have it. Okay, let us know what you'd like to do. And maybe this time, especially in a view of war against Russia, and if Ukraine, God forbid, will have its own nuclear arsenal, then all NATO strategy must be seriously adjusted. Jonathan, what do you think?
Oh, now, if that would be interesting if Ukraine could theoretically develop its own nuclear capability under the cover of, or under the protection of, the so-called Golden Dome. If the Golden Dome were to be expanded, as I have recommended, into by expanding the U.S. Space Force with a space fleet to create an ability to neutralize Russian and Chinese nuclear arsenals with that space fleet and the Golden Dome, then Ukraine would be free. They would actually have the freedom to either forego developing their own nuclear weapons, although they could go ahead and develop their own nuclear weapons without fear of being struck by nuclear retaliation from Russia. So this would open up, if Ukraine demonstrates a capability to develop their own nuclear weapons, at least they would have the inducement or the incentive to align with the West against Russia. And again, developing their own military capability. They're developing their own version of a military industrial complex and have some valuable lessons to teach the West. So I'm not opposed to Ukrainians developing their own nuclear capability, provided they do it within the context of unifying the West against Russia.
Yeah, what's interesting about the nuclear weapons and its use, interestingly enough, two countries in NATO, in Europe, have nuclear weapons. It's UK and France. But there is a difference. Well, UK's nuclear forces, they are aligned with NATO and they cannot act on its own. Whereas France can act on its own. It doesn't depend on whatever NATO will decide, the United States or anybody else.
Right.
So Ukraine, by developing nuclear weapons, will become a second country in Europe. And unlike France, it's not going to be even a member of NATO, at least for now.
Yeah.
So there will be an extreme headache for Russians that they have to now deal not only with NATO, not only with the US and its huge force, but there is a France which does not respond to NATO. And there is Ukraine which is already fighting Russia. So how is it going to respond to that?
Especially, Sasha, if the United States proceeds with its plans to develop the Golden Dome, and it's not the Golden Dome itself that bothers me. I agree with the objective of the Golden Dome. What I have concerns about are the methods by which they intend to build it, how they intend to spend their funds for building it. And right now, if you're looking at the bills and the way the thing is laid out and the way people are talking, they're talking about constructing a very complex system of satellites. And satellites, and presumably with space-based interceptors that would be based in satellites. And based upon my experience in the 1997 Winter War game, which involved a war in space, which had satellites versus satellites in low Earth orbit and high Earth orbit, what happens when you have satellites versus satellites is you have a very unstable and hair-trigger situation in low Earth orbit. You have a Mexican standoff in low Earth orbit, in which the side that fires first has a decisive advantage. That's what happened in the 1997 war game, and the results did not turn out well for the good guys, i.e. the United States. So this is a lesson which most people are not aware of. They weren't involved with it. There is a RAND report which came out describing the 1997 war game, but it too tended to gloss over some of the lessons learned, and they are not really paid attention to. They don't think that those results are relevant to the current situation. I say they are, and there's a very real danger that if the United States proceeds with the Golden Dome project along its current assumptions and plans, that the Golden Dome threatens to become the 21st century version of the Maginot Line. And you know what happened with the Maginot Line.
Yeah. Jonathan, I have my reservations about all Golden Dome and similar technologies. The problem is that starting with Germany's FAU weapons, FAU-2 in particular, and coming now to Israeli-Iran war, and Iran with their rather primitive rockets, missiles, they can still inflict substantial damage to Israel in spite of all levels of defense of different kinds. So far, and it could be for a foreseeable future, the means of attack are prevailing over the means of defense, at least for now. We don't know what's happening in the future, and maybe indeed something of that magnitude will be developed.
I'd say the means of attack at present are superior to the means of defense, but that gap is closing very rapidly.
That's true too.
And, and the more it closes, and with proper employment of existing and developing technologies, it will be possible for the United States, by constructing a Golden Dome type of defense, even if when it reaches initial operational capability, which is what the Trump administration would be able to achieve. If they're talking about achieving it, making it operational by the end of Trump's second term, that what it is possible to do is achieve initial operational capability, not full operational capability. But even with an initial capability, you still introduce a significant degree of uncertainty into the minds of Russian and Chinese planners that are contemplating use of nuclear weapons against the United States. The more you increase the sophistication of the defense and its apparent effectiveness, the more you increase uncertainty and, by extension, deterrence against Russian and Chinese aggression.
You know, I think before the U.S. will fully develop that system, I think Putin will be dead. So
I think you're right.
That's not.
I think you're right. Yeah. The problem with that, Sasha, is you have to be careful what you wish for. You really do, because remember I told you once before about this alternate history novel. Fox on the Rhine. Yes, that had the premise: what if Hitler had been assassinated, but his replacement was even worse, Heinrich Himmler? Yeah, he was totally sane, but totally evil, and he would have been arguably even worse for the Allies to fight against if had Hitler been assassinated.
But he was not evil enough to fight for power against Hitler. So,
true.
powerful.
Yeah, that's true. But it's still an interesting thing to contemplate. And right now, you have to be very careful about regime change. Does not always work in your favor. Yeah, you can even wind up with a worse alternative.
Same thing in Iran. Do you think
Yes.
that could be somebody much worse than this Ayatollah who is 86? There are three very powerful Ayatollahs who are actually make a lot of decisions. One is 103, another 101, and another 99 years old. And
I think those three are all fighting the actuarial tables. They're fighting the actuarial tables, not the West. Death has a way of overcoming everyone eventually. No one gets out of this life alive.
So who knows? Maybe they are fighting to establish a new world records for the Book of Guinness.
There you go.
Into the age of 120, 125, and that will serve as example for Putin, who would say, so if Ayatollah could live up to 120, and I'm only 70-some years old, I still have another 50 years to rule. Wonderful, life is great. But I hope it's not going to happen. Yeah.
So it's all, shall we say, very interesting times that we are living in. But right now, it's getting really exciting. It's getting really exciting in a negative sense for the Russians, and it is they who are being confronted with narrowing options for continuing their offensive against Ukraine. They're running out of capability, and they're arguably also running out of the will to continue fighting.
Well, they still develop their logistics systems. They're now bringing more donkeys into front lines.
Yeah.
So this is becoming a donkey army, the first one in history.
And all you're going to see as a result of that, Sasha, is an ever-decreasing ability of the Russians to continue offensive operations.
Yes, you're right, because it's already July.
Where they should be where Russian offensive operations, just by the weather, should be in full swing. There's nothing to impede them.
Yeah.
So, and certainly Putin is willing to continue the attack, but he doesn't have the logistical support or ability to sustain Russian offensive
He
operations.
can increase his attacks only against his opponents inside Russia, and he can keep jailing people for next to nothing, and that's all what he can do. It's becoming really pathetic, and the only thing what I hate is that every day there is a news about civilians killed by Russian civilians in Ukraine. This is absolutely unacceptable. Even if Russia wouldn't be a nuclear power, I'm coming back to where we started, the Western forces, including US, would do the same what they've done to Iran. Okay, that would have happened. The war would be stopped in no time. Now, Ivan, one more question before we finish our program today. I agree that the side who is attacking is having much more casualties than defenders. Uh, Acceptable ratio is 3-1, but in the Russian case it would be 4 or even 5-1. But with the development of a new warfare, such as drones, Ukrainians already showed some examples of very successful attacks by drones and by some missiles as well, where they are not taking heavy casualties like Russians when they are attacking these mid storms and so on. What do you think if Ukrainians will continue develop this new strategy?
Yeah, of course, the future wars they will be unmanned ones. In future wars, soldiers will not be on the battlefield. They will be in the bunkers operating drones, or the drones will be fighting with each other using the artificial intelligence until the time when artificial intelligence will decide to fight humans instead of
That is
other
that.
army.
No, they
Yeah,
will
yeah,
spare
yeah.
humans because they will think, well, humans are redundant, and let's spare them. Okay, you can continue.
And now we see actually the dawn of that age in the Ukrainian in the Russia-Ukrainian war, and the technologies are developing really quickly. But what we've seen also is the brilliant Ukrainian operations when Ukrainian commanders managed to find the weak points in Russian defense lines and very quickly attack massively in these weak points. We've seen it in the Kharkiv operation, and we've seen it in Kursk operation.
Yeah,
These attacks were really very fast. They were brilliantly developing, and there were no unmanned. Of course, there were drones, but the majority of attacking forces they were regular soldiers, but they were not attacking the fortified positions. Like Russians are doing, they're just attacking in front on fortified position. They're sending their troops like in those zombie waves, and they're being killed and killed and killed. They're not using tanks or armored vehicles anymore. They're using light civilian vehicles, actually like regular cars, just to quickly, or bikes quickly deliver soldiers and quickly try to cross the dead zone actually, and they're just dying and dying. But in those Ukrainian operations we've seen, there were classical military assault attacks with the tanks, with the armored vehicles. It was a matter of just of finding a really weak place in Russian defense lines and put a major effort in it, and then scale that effort and achieve the great results. And we've seen that with such tactics, such approach, you can even come to Moscow. It was proved by Prigozhin, by his march to Moscow.
Nobody resisted him.
Yeah, nobody resisted. They were just surprised. They couldn't. In Russian army, there is no initiative in the troops. All goes from the Kremlin, from the Putin, from the head command, and no one do nothing without an order.
And Putin has evacuated from Moscow. So there was a green line actually to invade Moscow, but I think Prigozhin just started to...
It was his big mistake, actually, and he paid for it by his life. Obviously, we don't know whether he's dead or not, but his commanders at least were confirmed that they were dead, and they've paid for that mistake. So whether they had chances to capture Moscow and then probably to switch the government in Russia. I don't know whether Prigozhin was a better Tsar of Russia than the Putin one. Probably even worse, but it would be another scenario.
Putin, I can't believe that something possible.
It's interesting what you're saying is that, see, in the American Army, when I was a military intelligence officer, and we would teach Soviet threat blocks, about the Soviet Army. One of the things that we noted about the Soviet Army is that all of the authority, as you say, would reside in the Soviet officer corps. That one of the big weaknesses is that they did not have, and still arguably do not have, an NCO corps, non-commissioned officers, sergeants. They're sergeants. Yeah. They're not nearly as well developed as they are in the American Army. In the American Army, typically at the platoon level, your second lieutenant, your brand new officer coming out of commissioning, he will have an NCO as his sergeant, who is much older than the lieutenant, much more experienced, and his purpose is to guide the lieutenant and teach him the necessary skills to be an effective leader. And interestingly enough, in combat, if the lieutenant gets killed, the leadership level actually increases because the sergeant takes over. So, but in this case, in the case of Russians, all of the authority and training is vested in the officer. So if the officer goes down, there is no backup.
And officers do nothing without an order from the higher officer because they're afraid of consequences, and it came from the period of Stalin, actually, because the officers in the Red Army, they were killed, but they were actually sentenced to death by their own commanders, or by KGB, really very fast. Just before the start of the German invasion to Soviet Union, which is the date of Russian version of Second World War. They celebrate the date when Hitler actually broke his treaty with Stalin and invaded Soviet Union. And just before that, the majority of Russian Red Army commanders, they were just sentenced to death by Stalin, and he eliminated the most of the experienced officers in his army, and it was one of the reasons why his army was caught in surprise, and why Germans were able to move so quickly in their blitzkrieg, because there were no orders, there were no experienced officers, and the army actually was mostly paralyzed.
Well, it was not surprising that Russians are claiming that Soviet Union made by far the biggest contribution to a victory by losing 27 million people. And how did they manage to lose so many people when no one had even close numbers? Even Germans who were defeated, they still lost less than
4 million in terms of military
because they
personnel.
use the same tactics like they're using right now in Ukraine. They use people instead of weapons. They have more people than the weapons actually. And,
Yeah, for them, loss of people is nothing. If they lose a tank, oh my God, tank costs so much money. You have to now order a new tank or repair this present one if possible, or so on. The people, they lost 5 people, 500 people. Doesn't matter. So the women will get new babies, and in 18 years they will be capable to continue fights or so on. What's happened in the meantime in this 18 years? Well, don't forget about 9 months required to produce a baby, and then another 18 years until this baby will be capable of fighting. Nobody addresses that. I never seen that addressed.
That's why Russia is going to have some really severe demographic problems following the conclusion of this war.
It's coming already, yeah.
And their after effects will be felt for decades.
Yeah. Well, at least in Siberia, it's not going to be noticeable because there will be a lot of Chinese men that Russian women will be very, very happy to marry and have children and family. They're hardworking people. They don't abuse their wives, and they don't drink. They don't eat a lot, a bowl of rice a day.
They're low maintenance.
Low maintenance people. Yeah. Well, we'll see how it's all developed. I'm looking forward to see you very soon again. And in the meantime, thank you so much for today's program. Glory to Ukraine, Slava Ukraini.
God bless America.
Героям слава. Героям слава. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And God bless Canada. Today is Canada Day.
There you go. Yeah, don't forget
Of
Canada.
course.
There you go.
Yeah.
Gotta get the
Oh,
routine.
we got it all.
There you
Thank
go.
you.